Hello and welcome to a fresh new edition of the Global Reset with me, Prashant Nair. It's the show where we try and connect the dots between policy, power, and of course, markets as well. A lot is happening in the world and we try to decode it as best as we can. Now, the big global headline that we're going to sort of woke up to this morning and we're tracking now as the day progresses is the Israeli airstrikes, preemptive airstrikes against Iran targeting their key nuclear enrichment facility. I mean, those visuals with sound, audio, etc., really telling us a story. The Israeli defense minister has declared a state of emergency shortly after the strikes, essentially a preemptive measure anticipating counter strikes from Iran. In fact, reports are suggesting that Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander has been killed in these strikes. Israeli defense officials have said they believe that the chief of Iran's military has also been eliminated in the opening strikes. Meanwhile, state-run media in Iran has reported multiple civilian casualties in Tehran and other parts of the country as well. Remember, this escalation follows just after a day when U.S. President Trump said that the country remains committed to resolving the Iran nuclear issue using diplomacy, but not too much diplomacy, with, of course, bombs going off in Tehran and in Iran as well. Now, following the attacks earlier today, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has denied U.S. involvement in the airstrikes against Iran, adding that Israel said the action was necessary for its self-defense. He also warned that Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel in the wake of the airstrikes, which have been conducted by Israel. Here's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. It's a recorded statement of the airstrikes which have been conducted. Listen in.
Tonight, Israel backs those words with action. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
Well, oil prices, of course, is the first reaction function. They surged at one point. Brent oil prices were up some 12%. I think they've come off a little bit, but they still remain about 7% higher after these unilateral airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities and military command structures. Now, the latest strikes come as the diplomacy, as President Trump essentially was talking about, is, if I can use the phrase, on life support. The 2-month deadline set by former President Trump for a new nuclear deal has just expired. The UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, passed a resolution Thursday accusing Iran of breaching non-proliferation commitments. And of course, Iran did respond earlier by pledging to accelerate its nuclear program, warning it had no option but to respond. And that's a quote. Now, a 6th round of talks was scheduled for this coming Sunday in Oman. But of course, events have sort of overtaken that. Friday morning, diplomacy had been drowned out by these explosions that we kind of sort of just heard. But beyond, the immediate price action, I think there is a more deeper, more precarious question. And it comes up occasionally over the last 2 decades. I mean, I've reported on this as what if? Could the Strait of Hormuz become the next geopolitical flashpoint? Will it come to that? Now, it's often called the world's most important oil artery. The strait connects the Persian Gulf with the Indian Ocean. It handles 30% of the world's seaborne oil, 20% of the global energy supply, and most of Saudi, Iraqi, Kuwaiti, Qatari oil exports as well. It's its narrowest, and it's an interesting factoid, but it's just 21 miles wide at its narrowest. So basically like a choke point with very little room for error, none whatsoever, actually. Now, for decades, Iran has threatened, whenever tensions have risen, whenever there have been sanctions, etc., Iran has threatened to close the strait. But, despite fiery sort of rhetoric and long history of confrontation, it's never been closed. It's never come to that. On your screen, you'll see some of these flashpoints. Through the 80s, 90s, and through the 2000s, 2018, 19, it's just been one confrontation, face-off, etc. after other, but it's never really been closed. Why? Because shutting down the strait is economic self-harm in that sense for Iran. Iran itself depends entirely on these seaborne oil exports through the same strait. The last major buyer of Iranian oil is China, and basically, if it were to shut it, it risks sort of disrupting relations with Iran's most important economic ally, at least, the buyer a bulk of its oil in Asia, which is China. Now, the closure of the strait will also, of course, not go down very well with its own neighbors who are all big oil exporters, because, as I said, a lot of the oil really goes through that particular strait, be it Saudi Arabia or other countries as well. So without sort of a consensus, really, this perhaps will be not taken too kindly by its own neighbor. So this is a story, I think, which we are going to be tracking closely. Oil markets, of course, I think are also watching. I think at the margin, that's the reason why prices jumped 12%. It's a pretty large jump that we really have seen. Let's bring our, expert in, and we'll talk more about this. Adrian Mowat needs no real introduction. Regular on CNBC-TV18 Prime. He's an investor at Hong Kong SAR. Adrian, great to have you with us here on the program. Thanks very much. Lots of developments to sort of really take in, but what's your sense? Is this going to be a long, drawn-out conflict with a durable lift to oil prices, or like what we've seen previously, even if the spikes are sharp, I'm talking about oil prices, they're short-lived? Your thoughts?
This is a long, drawn-out conflict, and the conflict has been predominantly through proxies, whether they're the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon. This war has been going on. What has changed is it's more direct. Now, we did see after the horrific terrorist incidents nearly 2 years ago in Israel that the Israelis did attack Iran directly, and then there was a counterattack where there was broad defense of Israel by many of its Arab neighbors, plus NATO forces as well. So this has been going on for a while. You make some sort of interesting points about the Straits of Hormuz and how that can choke off supply. It is worth reflecting at the moment that traffic through the Suez Canal, looking at the most recent sort of revenue data for the Egyptian government, was down some 30%. And that's because of Yemenis or Houthi attacks on shipping going down through the Red Sea. So we're already in this situation where the unrest is disrupting trade in terms of container traffic, but also oil and natural gas going through the Red Sea. Potentially, this becomes a broader issue for energy coming out of the Gulf. But remember, this is happening at a time where the oil price is very low. We've been in the 60s. Generally, we're getting relief from the very high energy prices that we witnessed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine nearly 3 years ago. So I think the impact on the global economy of what's going on here is going to be moderate, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to see a resolution, some sort of peace between Israel and Iran. And I think if it is correct that some of the senior military leadership in Iran has been killed in these strikes, that in itself could compound any ability to come to some sort of peaceful resolution.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's an unanswerable question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, Adrian. You think that the strait will close?
The Straits of Hormuz? I think there could be, temporary effective closure as shippers are reluctant to move their vessels. You might see an impact where they can't actually get insurance. But I think that would be temporary, that measures would be put in place, perhaps the Saudis, the UAE, the Kuwaitis providing that insurance. And I think you would see the movement of military vessels, whether from the United States, the United Kingdom, but also, the Saudis, the UAE, the Kuwaitis also have military assets as well, trying to defend vessels going through the straits. Remember, though, that we have plenty of buffer here. Oil prices are low, inventories are high, and we're not in the really peak energy use season.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, I've spoken with so many global economists over the last few weeks, and they all kind of agree on one thing. Maybe markets don't agree on it, but the economist community does, that don't go by the quiet. Trade is going to start getting hit. Maybe it's a second half story, but that slowdown will come. So in that sense, it's not as if there's a big, great tailwind for oil in that sense if the economy is going to slow down substantially in the second half, Adrian. So there's that counterbalance in that sense, right?
Yeah, I think, demand for energy commodities should moderate if the sincere concern that economies do slow down. And, we do have this sort of unusual environment. If you look at the S&P, your sense is that the trade war is over. But clearly that is not the case. The Trump administration on Liberation Day came out with extremely high tariffs and has either delayed their implementation or rolled them back. But they're still to come to an agreement with the key entities, which is the European Union and China. This is where the big trade is. And I don't think either the European Union or China are willing to sort of sign up to a deal that the Trump administration wants, which would be a one-sided deal. If we think about the discussions that happened earlier this week in London, so what came out of them? We've got some sort of framework. What does that mean? A framework so that Xi Jinping and Donald Trump can have a conversation. It's pretty random whether that's going to come out with a trade deal that settles this. So I think risk assets don't have a great deal of cushion priced into them at the moment. And I could see a July in which the results season generates sort of more evidence of some of the damage that the trade war is causing. A results season that also makes people think about, if this growth rate has slowed down, maybe these US equity markets are a little bit too expensive. I think it will bring, add to the current flow where people are moving money out of US assets into other assets. So I'm of the view that markets will move lower through the third quarter, but then you get given what should be a very attractive opportunity to add to emerging markets and to European assets, assuming that the situation in the Middle East doesn't escalate significantly.
I was reading a JP Morgan note saying that if the strait is closed, oil prices could jump. It's never closed, but so it's you never know. There's no historical context reference point in that sense, but prices could jump. Oil prices could jump Brent to about $100 to $120. But as you said, if it were to happen, it'll be short-lived. It'll be sort of blockages but not a more durable kind of closure. That's not the base case. And the other thing, of course, is where is the US in all of this? It's so far said we'll stay out of it, but if it starts to impact oil in a more sustained way, that's the one thing President Trump does not want, right? Actually, that's the one thing in which he's had some success to show, which is lower oil since he's taken charge. You think if it were, that's the one thing which can get them to kind of sort of come in hard, force Israel to sort of pipe down and sue for peace?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what oil price the Trump administration's after, because if the oil price is around the 60 level, then their sort of drill, baby, drill plan that you're going to get increased production out of the United States is not going to go ahead. So there may be a sweet spot where actually a slightly higher oil price in the 70s then allows some expansion of shale gas exploration. So it's an interesting dynamic. I think oil moving 70 to 80 is probably very manageable for the global economy. So I'm not sure they would be overly focused on that. But I have to be open with you. I really don't understand what the Trump foreign policy is. And that, again, makes me a little bit anxious about risk assets in that it's an unusual policy. It seems to be very, bipolar between it. Well, probably that's the wrong way to put it, but, it seems to be one in which it's a transactional discussion between the United States and a particular country. It doesn't have a sort of broad sort of strategic objective. And I think we have to recognize that that environment is perhaps an environment that we understand less than perhaps we would with previous US administrations. So I'd like a little bit more of a risk premium when dealing with geopolitical events with President Trump.
Point taken. Adrian, let's just come for a quick bit to this part of the world, and India has again done well. I mean, broader markets, etc., have done very well, and there's always this domestic bid. So foreigners can do what they want, but there's always interest here, and that's kind of sort of kept markets from correcting very sharply for long periods of time. They've been short-lived and generally well contained. What is your sense here, Adrian? You said that through the second half, maybe third quarter and beyond, you see markets drifting lower. Have we seen the highs for the year? Or is the India case going to play out differently?
Yeah, so I don't think we've seen the highs for the year in emerging markets and in Europe. Possibly we saw the highs in sort of February, March for the US equity markets. We haven't retested those yet. If we look at the situation that India is enjoying at the moment, we had a period of time of a relatively weak rupee and US interest rates quite high. We've now got the US dollar weakening. The rupee has been appreciating versus the US dollar, as is in line with other emerging economies. It's given a headroom for the central bank to ease policy. And I see that as a very favorable environment. India's manufacturing sector as a percentage of its economy is much more modest than we have in places like China. So I think it is more insulated to the trade war, with one obvious caveat to that is clearly the Indian software industry, has some exposure to this in exporting services and also in the needs to get visas for some of its employees to work in the United States as well. But I think India is favorably positioned for what's going on here. I'm very much in the camp that the dollar will continue to weaken, and that's a good environment for emerging markets because it just makes life a lot more easy for the central bank to manage monetary policy in an appropriate way rather than worrying about a weak currency.
Absolutely, and I think that's good to hear. EM's highs of the year still not in, maybe later this year. So something to look forward to in a pretty downbeat overall kind of environment. Although, as I think you also said, markets don't reflect it, not in the US or anywhere else. And markets are, of course, they are doing their own thing. Adrian, thank you very much for joining us here on this program. I understand you have a meeting, otherwise would have loved to sort of go on maybe next time. Appreciate it here on the Global Reset.
Thanks, Prashant.
Thank you. Well, what we'll do is we'll take a quick commercial break here, but we're going to come back with Sean Foley. He's professor of the Department of History at the Middle Tennessee State University. An expert as far as the Middle East is concerned, geopolitics there, Iran, Israel. He's written for publications, written a book, and we'll try and understand from him what this really means in terms of these strikes, the strikes that Israel has conducted in Iran earlier today. Welcome back to CNBC-TV18 Prime. You're with us here on the Global Reset. Dr. Sean Foley is professor, Department of History at the Middle Tennessee State University. He's joining us now. Thanks very much, sir, for being with us here. Let me start by asking a very basic question. What does Israel aim to achieve, in your opinion, with these strikes?
First of all, shock and awe. The Israelis have reportedly used upwards of 200 aircraft, which is a third of their air force, in a time when they already have an enormous amount of other military commitments. This is meant to be a significant statement of Israeli policy. They believe that they faced, and they've stated this publicly, an existential threat from the Iranian government, and they have taken a massive attack on the scale we have not seen in years in the region. The only thing recently akin to this would be the attack on Hezbollah last year with the pager attack. This is not only an attack on Iran itself, on over 100 targets, but also targeting some of Iran's most important military leaders. And it is not just one attack, there's already been a second attack, and there are indications that this may go on for a significant period of time. This is meant to send a significant signal to significantly downgrade, if not eliminate as much as possible, Iran's nuclear program.
Should we throw in words like regime change, Dr. Foley?
That I don't know yet, but they are certainly sending a statement to the regime. They are certainly, again, hitting significant figures within regime. They indicated just recently that other figures in the Iranian government may have already been hit, but certainly this is sending a statement to date. The Ayatollah Khamenei, the most important person in the regime, and Iran's president haven't been hit, but almost any other leader has been. And certainly this is meant to send a signal to hit Iran's policies, hit Iran's nuclear program, and at the very least, forced a significant shift in Iranian foreign policy at the minimum. This is meant to be a significant event both for Israel, for the Middle East, and for Iran.
But what triggered it, Dr. Foley, is the question. Why now?
Okay, the Israelis believe that they faced an existential threat. There's absolutely no question that that is what was communicated to the American administration. That has been what has been both noted in both Israeli media as well as in the American media as well. This is why again, you can see this in the statement made by Secretary of State.
So, Dr. Foley, sorry, allow me to come in. So that I understand that, but why now? Why this Friday morning? I mean, were they anticipating a strike from Iran? So it's in that sense, it's preemptive. Why now? Why today?
Okay, a couple of reasons. One of which, again, is that that in terms of timing, this is a situation in which they believe that Iran is perhaps at its nadir in terms of regional power. Among Iran's most important allies have either been significantly downgraded, or they've been, in the case of Bashar al-Assad's regimes in Syria, completely eliminated. So this is a situation where Israel believes that Iran is significantly weaker. There were also, to be blunt, significant disagreements between the Israeli government and the U.S. government over the U.S. Administration's drive to have negotiations. And again, there are open questions about the timing. Again, it is remarkable to think that they would have the strike on the same weekend that the United States and Iran were going to carry out negotiations on Sunday in Oman. It's difficult not to consider, at the very least, as if those negotiations played at least some role in the timing. And I should add that there's also domestic issues that should be considered as well. Within Israel itself, the Israeli prime minister this past week faced an extremely difficult domestic situation where he barely won a no-confidence vote in the Israeli Knesset. And certainly that has to be taken into consideration into anything that's happening in this region.
So a bit of so it's aimed at domestic politics as well. I mean, the electorate as well.
There's absolutely no question that this is a way of sending a message not only to the region, but to the world, that Israel remains a strong military power, that Benjamin Netanyahu
helps his own base and his own standing within the country.
And indeed, there have been some press reports within Israel that, in fact, some of the negotiations involving that no confidence vote may have also been predicated, or at least there had been some discussions of this attack. In other words, this is not the right time to have this type of discussion right before we're about to launch a major attack on Iran.
So two questions. One, will we see major, at least attempts at a big counterstrike by Iran? Because I mean, some of these things are true, which is that military commanders, leaders of the sort of military and the Revolutionary Guard, etc., they've been sort of eliminated. Surely the leadership in Iran cannot sit back, right? I mean, they've got to show strength as well. So will we see that? And where is the U.S. in all of this? Go on.
First of all, those are excellent questions. And first of all, there have already been reports that there are several hundred Iranian drones that are moving relatively slowly from Iran towards Israel, and that Israel is in the process of dealing with those drones. The U.S. Embassy in Israel has actually alerted its staff to stay within emergency compounds or out of sight for a significant period. The question of the United States is a powerful one. Secretary of State Rubio issued a proclamation that, to be frank, puzzled many observers in the United States. It noted again that the United States was not publicly involved in this strike, although U.S. supplied assets, and certainly there must have been at least some coordination with the United States. But again, they made very clear in their public statement that the administration, as you can see on screen, was not involved in the strikes, and also strongly encouraging the Iranians, if to the point of almost giving an order or a directive not to strike. But many people noted that there was not, you can see in the statement on screen, that Rubio did not give significant support or express support for Israel. The Republican leader in the Senate also issued a similar statement as well. So again, part of this is an open confusion, and again, perhaps disagreements between the United States and Israel about the timing. And in particular, President Trump has made very clear that he would like to have, at all possible, a revised nuclear deal with Iran. He had invested significant time and resources into reaching that agreement. That's also something, to be blunt, that other allies of the United States in the region are looking forward to as well, that this is something that other states in the region would like to see, a reduction in tensions.
I think these are questions which a lot of this will be watched closely through the weekend as well. And I think that's one reason why markets are still a little edgy, because you don't know whether this escalates in one form or the other, or it de-escalates in some form or the other. It's all up in the air. Dr. Foley, thank you very much for coming on this program, this edition of the Global Reset. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights, and hope to have you again as we continue to track the story. Thanks indeed.
Thank you very much for your time.
Well, that's it on this episode of the Global Reset. Thank you very much for watching. Programming continues right here on CNBC-TV18 Prime.